Hello, film nerds, and welcome back to Blockbuster Card. Still, we're only in our fifth episode, a new show from Osiris Media and Library Card Productions. I'm Brian Brinkman. I'm joined once again by RJ and Megan, two parents who have braved parenting, pandemics, and are ready for whatever AI data center you want to build in their community. Megan, RJ, how are you guys doing today?
I'm doing great.
I'm doing
I'm
great.
I'm ready to talk about this data center.
Me too. I just want to note that this is only the second episode of Blockbuster Card that I've been invited to, and I hope to maintain my invitation and be invited back
Unfair.
again.
Unfair.
Invited to
I'm
what are
sorry, you were gallivanting all over Europe.
I'm
We had to
just
hold
kidding.
down the fort for you. We were,
You guys did a great
here in
job.
the US. Yeah.
I just
Hey.
want to note that I've never been invited on a B family trip across Europe. So,
That's true.
who's got the upper hand here?
Who's really behind?
Exactly.
I'm excited to talk about this one.
Me too. We are avid film fans here. We are constantly talking about movies, directors, great performances, and whether or not a film quote unquote works in our private text threads. And so we have been bringing these conversations to life here for you all via Blockbuster Card. For our fifth episode, we are discussing Ari Aster's 2025 film Eddington, a harrowing and stress-inducing examination of the impact of the 2020 COVID pandemic, plus a mayoral election, plus the push for the future of a small town in rural New Mexico. It's a fascinating look at what the pandemic did for us as a larger society, where no one is spared and all flaws are picked apart with exceptional detail. This is also the first all caps new movie that we are discussing here on Blockbuster Card. Full disclosure, this is my favorite movie of 2025 so far. It is a movie I cannot stop thinking about. It combines all things I'm looking for in cinema: tension, difficult choices, sweeping shots, and an ending that less tidies things up than gives more questions to ponder. I'm excited to dive into this discussion today, but first, before we talk about Eddington, preamble is essential in all podcasts. We all know this. RJ, what is the last great movie that you saw besides, and I say besides because I'm assuming Eddington was one of the last great movies you saw, but what's the last great movie you saw besides Eddington?
Oh man, that is such a good question. And I can tell you that because I'm trying to just be your guys, I'm trying to be friends with both of you guys as much as I can. And so I've been watching movies when I can. And I just this morning finished The Killing, the 1956 Kubrick movie, which was
Great one.
really great. Really great. I've watched two movies in 24 hours, which for me is just incredible.
Oh my God, we're growing
Incredible
on you,
pace.
RJ. I love this. That is an incredible pace. I've never seen that movie. It's been on my list for a while, so I have to see
Good.
that.
It was good.
Very good. The two movies in 24 hours, there is a certain rhythm you get into when you get into, Meg knows all about this, when you get into like a film week where you finish one and you're like, oh, you know what? I want something kind of similar, but a little bit different and from a different decade. And then you jump ahead and then you jump to another one and then you keep going. My record thus far is 4 in a day, which, are some of my favorite days
Jesus.
I've experienced in the last 2 years, but it's a rare thing. It's a tough thing with parents or with kids and a full-time job. Meg, what is the last great movie you saw?
Well, I did see two movies in 24 hours this week, and they were both Ari Aster films, but I am not going to be talking about one of them because it is not one of the great movies that I've seen. More on that later. But I want to talk about a movie that I just saw called From Dusk Till Dawn. It's a 1996 film directed by Robert Rodriguez, and the script is by Quentin Tarantino. And it is Harvey Keitel stars in it, and he's this disillusioned preacher who's taking his kids on a road trip after leaving his church. And they're kidnapped by two criminal brothers, played by George Clooney and Tarantino. And they're taken to this seedy Mexican bar to hide out after committing these crimes. But what they don't know, and this is not really a spoiler because it's obvious if you look the movie up, but is that this strip club in Mexico is full of vampires. And I watched this film because I heard that it helped inspire Sinners. And the parallels are definitely there, but Sinners is way more sophisticated and thoughtful. But this movie is so awesome. I don't love horror. I think I'm on record saying that. I'm not a horror person. but this is campy in a way that makes it super fun. It's gore to the max. There's an insane amount of special effects, just like exploding zombies, morphing zombies. It's really a wild ride, and it's super fun. And it also stars Juliette Lewis, and I'm a huge Juliette Lewis fan. And this came out, I think it's after Christmas Vacation and Natural Born Killers, but she's still so young and like perfect in the film. Highly recommend. Have you guys seen it?
I haven't seen it in a long, long time. I need to rewatch it following Sinners. It is on the Sean Fantasy syllabus of Sinners. Yeah, that's like one of the early Clooney breakout roles where
Yeah.
He's
he
so
really
good.
kind of took a step up.
He's really good
Yeah.
in it.
Yeah, I've seen it. Maybe twice. Definitely when it came out, and probably one more time since then.
Really?
one.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. Tarantino's so weird
So
as
weird.
an actor. Mhm.
Yes,
I mean, in every way.
in
Yeah.
every way. I just read his book, Cinema Speculation, which made me watch 12 different movies earlier this year, all from the 70s that inspired his work. And we're all wild. Stuff like Hardcore and The Fun House just kind of blew my mind in ways I wasn't expecting. But the last great movie I saw, another formative director in kind of an oddball kind of sideshow project, was The Big Lebowski from the Coen brothers, which I hadn't seen in at least a decade. This was a movie that was just kind of permanently on in my college houses. And
Yeah.
I think the majority of times I've seen it have been in like 25, 30-minute, you know, clips. And then we go and do something else, and you come back and like, oh, this is the ending. Oh, this is this. And I think I've only ever sat down and watched it in full like 3 times in my life. And I was just looking for an easy, fun comedy on a Tuesday, Wednesday night. And instead, what I got was some of the best needle drops in history, amazing cinematography, some of the most natural, hilarious comedy from John Goodman and Jeff Bridges, and an approach to filmmaking that I wish more young directors would do, in that they essentially take a film noir detective story and they just put it in stoner LA in the 90s. And you like fuse those two things together, and there's so much that you can suddenly do from an artistic and creative standpoint. Um, One of those movies that like everyone has seen, but I would highly encourage people to like sit down and like really study it. There's a moment where they're outside of the bowling alley and they just fade to black, but they keep the neon lights in perspective. And as a result, you get this like kind of sad, romantic longing for neon America, that is like a big testament within this overall movie. And you kind of fade out of this one scene, and it just like seeing it this time just hit me in a completely different way.
It's been a really long time since I've seen that movie, and I feel like, yeah, similar to what you were saying, like there was definitely like joints being passed around most of the times I watched this movie, and I was really young, so I have to go back to it. Iconic character development there, and Coen Brothers are so fun. Their films are just, they're so good at putting you in a specific place and time and really letting you live there.
Exactly. Got any more with that sarsaparilla? Um, RJ, have you
Yeah,
ever
I've
seen The
seen
Big
that.
Lebowski?
Yeah, I've seen it. Yep, maybe 10, 15 times. I mean, it's like a, watch it every once in a while because it's just
Yes.
epic.
It's a classic.
Well, we are going to talk about our movie of the week here, movie of the month. We're coming to you every so often with blockbuster card episodes here within Library Card. I demanded this week. We were supposed to talk about something else, and I walked out of this movie and I texted you guys. I said, that is the best movie I've seen this year. We need to talk about this as soon as possible. And so Eddington, full disclosure for anyone listening to this who has not seen the movie, we are going to spoil a lot of this movie. So if you have not yet seen this and you are curious about seeing this, which I would encourage everyone to be, I would say just pause this. You can reduce our viewership numbers, our overall listenership here for this episode, and go see the movie, because it is strangely leaving theaters quicker than it should. More on that in a bit. There's quite a bit of controversy around this movie. But to me, it's going to be really hard to beat out this movie in 2025. There's a lot of great movies on the horizon, but this really exemplifies a lot about where we're at right now, what makes this moment in time so tense that I want to explore. And so, just to dive in, a quick synopsis of the movie takes place in late May 2020. Timing is very, very important in this movie, as you will see. We're in the middle of the COVID pandemic in a small town in Eddington, New Mexico, rural New Mexico. Um, at this point in time, Mayor Ted Garcia, played by Pablo Pascal, has implemented a lockdown due to state mandates. The local sheriff, Joe Cross, played by Joaquin Phoenix, disapproves of this, believing that the mandates violate people's freedom of choice. Um, Along with this, there is a AI data center that is trying to break ground outside of Eddington to open a really powerful data center. They are working along with the mayoral's office to get this into place. Um, Joe Cross, the sheriff, determined or decides to run for mayor in opposition to the mask mandates and what he perceives as encroachments on his personal freedoms. He is also married to a woman, Louise, played by Emma Stone, who had a past relationship with Ted Garcia, who is also her mom is living with them, who is very much into conspiracy theories and all these kind of wild ideas about a pandemic. And you have boomer parents. You might have heard about this in 2020. At As the movie continues, the George Floyd murder happens in Minneapolis. The Black Lives Matter protests start to emerge in Eddington, much to Joe Cross's bewilderment. He starts to interact with social media, making some pretty significant faux pas, not really respecting grammar. You're being manipulated, YOUR, is a great symbol throughout the overall movie. Um, Ted's son starts to participate in the Black Lives Matter protests, which leads to some tension with the mayor, Ted Garcia. And all of this kind of comes to a fray when Joe Cross is responding to a noise complaint at Ted's campaign fundraiser. He tries to address this. Ted assaults Joe in public, embarrasses him, which leads to Joe going on a murderous rampage throughout the town of Eddington. As this is happening, larger forces at play are shipping in Antifa warriors, Antifa uh, whatever Antifa members into Eddington who are they take captive one of his deputies, and it ultimately leads to Joe Garcia being murdered in the streets of Eddington, or attempted murder in the streets of Eddington, and a young, eager, kind of directionless young man named Brian, of all names, saves him on camera, which then transforms his life going forward and transforms the town of Eddington, because in the conclusion of the film, Joe is elected mayor, even though he is essentially in a vegetative state. His mother-in-law serves as the interim mayor, she speaks on behalf of the mayor's office. They open the data center, and we leave Eddington in the future, essentially, after all of these events have happened and twisted the lives of all these people. So we're going to get into the details of it. Meg, I want to just turn to you really quickly. What were your kind of broad takeaways of this movie, and how did this movie make you feel 5 years after the summer of 2020?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for that summary. It was really great. And I do want to say, though, it is Pedro Pascal. And because he's my boyfriend, I feel like I just need to make sure that we say that it's Pedro,
What
not
did I say? Oh,
Pablo.
geez, I am so sorry. It is Pedro.
That's okay. I'll let him know that you didn't mean it. The first time I watched this movie twice. And I wanted to see it twice because the first time I watched it, I was really interested in the plot and the tone. and I was very confused about who I was supposed to identify with in the story. And I spent a lot of time kind of deciding, is this a Western? Is this a political thriller? Is this a social commentary? I was trying to figure that out. And the second time, I was able to not worry about those things and see all the Easter eggs that he put in and the subtle and the not so subtle social commentary that Aster's making. And I really enjoyed the film. I loved it the first time, but I really loved it the second time. And I really think it's a movie that will be more appreciated after some time has passed. I think it's maybe too soon for some people to see themselves and our world reflected like this and be able to laugh at ourselves, because I think this movie is really about saying all those things and kind of putting up all those things and not letting anybody off the hook. I think that one thing that I really admire about what Astor's done here is that everybody is kind of wrong in this movie. Like, no one's
Yeah.
right in this movie. Everybody's a
Yeah.
sinner. Everybody's made mistakes. Everybody's extreme. Everybody's believing stuff they shouldn't. And I think that everybody's self-righteous. And I think that is, it's hard to watch sometimes. Like in most movies, you want to know who to root for and who's the good guy. And he doesn't really give you that. And I think it's super brave. I also, after watching Beau is Afraid this week, realized that he's really into making kind of like feel bad flicks, like movies that just make you stressed out and anxious and not feeling great. And I haven't watched a lot of his other movies because I get scared of horror films, so I really stay away from them. But now I'm really curious and I want to try because I feel like his perspective is really interesting and he takes huge risks as a filmmaker. And I think this film is a really big risk. But after seeing Beau, it's so much more hemmed in than that, and follows a much tighter storyline. And also, he kind of spreads out the pain. In Beau is Afraid, there's like one protagonist that gets all the pain. And at least in this movie, it's kind of spread out. But I really found this movie compelling and a movie worthy of multiple viewings.
Share a lot of those sentiments. I feel like this is a movie that is going to only get better the more times you watch it because of the Easter
Mhm.
eggs. But RJ, you saw this yesterday in one of the greatest uh, parenting juggling house homeowner
Yeah.
moves ever to see this movie. The man had an HVAC guy at his house. He had his kids set up in the theater next to him to watch Superman. Also, he could see this and stay on task. What were your thoughts on this overall movie? How did it make you feel?
Yeah, I share a lot of what Megan said. I think first of all, you have like three of the best living actors, in one place, which is pretty awesome. I texted you guys this yesterday. Like, to me, it was like two separate movies. I thought the first 80% of it was like, it almost felt like a little too heavy-handed for me as like a, true ripped from the headlines kind of thing. But I understand that
Mhm.
that's part of the point. I mean, maybe it's just too close and too real for us, like dealing with COVID. It's just like, yes, I remember like it. And it sort of reminded me of like a lot of the stuff we've talked about with books, where it's like when it's too closely tied to historical events, it almost feels like it's like a paint by numbers thing. And I feel like the protests
Mhm.
and the counter protests, and then, but like the shift actually is what I thought was like what Megan was pointing out in terms of like what you're feeling for. Like, you start to feel for Joe Cross,
Yeah.
like it, and then right before he starts killing everyone, but like you kind of
Yeah.
like you kind of like feel for him, and you're like, oh man, I kind of feel bad for this guy. And then it completely shifts again. So I think in that sense, like it did a good job. I do wonder, I don't know, Brian, if you agree, or Megan, I know you said like you thought the pacing was good. Like, I felt like the first 80%, like I feel like it could have been like 10 minutes shorter, but at the same
Oh, I
time,
didn't
like the
say the
story
pace was
didn't.
I didn't think the pacing was good.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought you said that it felt like it was like, I don't know. Do you think it could have been shorter at all? Because I felt
Yeah,
like
I
that there
mean,
were parts of it that could have been like just trimmed a tiny bit, but I don't know.
yeah, definitely. I agree with that. I think that, I mean, I'm very tainted by just watching this Beau is Afraid, but that movie needed like an hour cut out of it. So I think that maybe like he's definitely a filmmaker who likes to include a lot of things and also likes to have, likes to be allowed to have that creative control. I think it works in this movie. I think there's definitely parts that could be tighter for sure. I think that the inclusion of like every other kind of group, whether it's like the aggrieved, white people who are like trying to stand up for Black Lives Matters, the I thought which was like a militant Black Lives Matters group that was just kind of thrown in at the end, but then has this like huge plot point that's like crucial to the ending, but you really just see like 2 seconds of them on an airplane. I think there's just a lot of different groups in there included, and it just becomes, I think, like you're saying, RJ, like a little muddled, maybe. If that is what you're saying, but yeah. So, but it's hard for me to piece out like if that is the pacing that it affects, or just there's an overcrowdedness to the plot, but then there's also this like spaciousness and that he accomplishes like with his cinematography that balances out in a way that's really fascinating that I want to talk to you guys about.
Yeah, and Brian, because you loved it so much, I want to hear your take because I have like
Yeah,
some
me
plot
too.
questions too, but I want to like respond to all the stuff that we were saying.
Everything.
That's a
So
lot.
All of it.
all of it. No, I don't think you guys are wrong from a plot standpoint. I mean, I was thinking about it. So Ari Aster's 38 years old, and I kind of equate him with Brady Corbet, who
Mhm.
directed The Brutalist, who's 37, 38, and Damien Chazelle, who has directed La La Land and Babylon and Whiplash, who is 40. So all these guys are kind of, right in our age range. They're all similar to each other. They all have come up in very unique ways where they've seen the business of making movies change dramatically since they started. Um, and all of which are kind of seen as our auteurs of this time period. And I think that one of the challenges that they have, because of those directors, one has made a pacing perfection movie, which was Whiplash. That is 90 minutes
Oh,
of you just jump in.
perfect.
The plot never weaves, it just keeps moving along. There's a level of intensity, and then when it's ready to be over, it's over, and there's no coda, there's no addendum to it. I do think that a lot though has changed. That movie came out in 2014. A lot has changed in the decade since, where from an entertainment standpoint, it is so easy to just sit down and throw on Netflix, and there is suddenly a 4 episode, 5 episode documentary interviewing your favorite quarterbacks or interviewing your favorite tennis players, or, you know, reality TV on top of reality TV. There are television shows that come out that are 4 or 5 episodes, and they just drop into your feed and you can watch them. I was talking to a friend who went saw this, about the challenge of getting people to come out to the theater right now. And I think part of that challenge leads to this desire that you can't just tell a story on the screen. You have to tell a story that has like so much meaning and so much that you
Mm.
chew into. And as a result, a movie like Eddington, it's 230, I wanna say, is that
Yeah,
right?
I think so.
30,
Yeah,
240?
2.5. Yeah.
It's definitely inching towards a little bit too long. I think I felt the entire picture of it works, and the entire all of the diversions, all of the new characters that they're introducing, all of the moments of, like, silent tension throughout the movie. You think about when Joaquin Phoenix is outside of the grocery store, and the grocery store is kicking out the older man who isn't wearing a mask because he says he can't breathe in it, and it leads to kind of that's where Joaquin Phoenix's character decides to run for mayor. Like, without those moments of quiet and like, what are the people going to do, and kind of him hanging the camera on people standing 6 feet apart in front of a
Yeah.
grocery store, I don't think you would have felt that. Like, I think it's very easy 5 years on to look back and be like, "Wow, COVID was intense." But, like, to remember what it felt like to be in May and early June of 2020, where you may not have known someone who had COVID, but you knew that if I go outside and I break mandates, A, I'm gonna become a social pariah, and B, I may be the person that then infects my family, and we didn't know that there were vaccines on the way, and we didn't, like, there was so much intensity in that specific period that I do think the length of this, plus the combination of the election that is looming and the AI data center that is kind of hanging over everyone, really showcases how intense of a period in history and how, like, of a crux of history we're living in right now. um I think also that aspect works really well when you consider, is it too soon for a movie like this to be made? Because I think that
Mm.
is it too soon adds to the way we're all like, this movie will feel different in 20 years versus 2025. You know, we
Yeah.
know what it was like to live through this. So ultimately, like, yes, I would agree. This was probably 15, 20 minutes, a little bit longer than it needed to be. But I also think it justified the runtime in ways that a lot of 230, 240 movies simply don't. Looking at you, F1.
I loved F1. I don't know why, I just did. But yeah, I totally agree. And I think that there's something really interesting because I think that what he's trying to do is kind of show us what happened then and also how that's affected where we are now. And I think that it maybe it's too soon for us to realize that 2020 really cemented our online universe in a way that continues to impact us today. And I think that he does such a brilliant job of that in this movie. The way he uses technology and phones is, I haven't seen a film that has done it as well. And it is very important that we have movies about that because our whole fucking lives are spent like this now. And I think the fact that he's making a movie that shows how each of these people, like you think about Joe or his wife, brilliantly played by Emma Stone, so like off type for her, and the mother, how they're all so deep in these webs of their own kind of beliefs, all brought on by the technology. It's hard to watch. It's hard to remember that that's kind of what did it to us and that we're still there. And I also was really glad to see a movie about this time period because I was teaching remotely. I had just figured out, we had set up remote teaching. I was teaching third grade on Zoom to kids, all over the place. And George Floyd happened. And having to discuss that with third graders who were getting way more news than they should have because they're at home all day. It was so intense and overwhelming to do that and feel like you were doing it responsibly. And I just had all of those feelings like coming back to me and realizing how you felt so disconnected from everything, but then you also were seeing something that was historical in such a devastating way and seeing it play out and know that everybody was having to experience this alone in their homes. It brought up a lot. And I think that's really brave as a filmmaker to do that.
I agree with
Can
that. Yeah,
can we
RJ.
talk about the data center? Because like I realize
Yeah.
like it plays a key role in the ending, which is
Yeah.
like it felt to me like a set piece that never really got any actual like I didn't feel it reflected in the story at all. I understand that it to me it was like a symbol of what Pascal's character like stood for, which is like we're gonna take these old towns and make them into something new through this thing that nobody really understands is kind of like the symbolism of it. But then it's like at the end, it's like, and now we have this data center, but like throughout the movie, throughout the plot, it wasn't really part of even like the discussions about where the city goes. It was just sort of like in the background. And then suddenly at the end, it's like, this is the conclusion is that we're getting this thing that everybody was, I didn't feel like it was emphasized enough in the story to like warrant the focus that it had. Because at the end, I was like, "Oh right, I forgot about this whole data center thing." But maybe I just missed.
Yeah. I think it's fair critique. I think you're absolutely right that like there were 20 minutes of the movie that would go by and you wouldn't even think about it, and then it would be, a flyer against it,
Yeah,
or there
flyer.
would
Yeah, yeah.
be like
Mhm.
comments from people online about how it was going to take all their water resources. I guess my read on it, and I'd be curious both your thoughts on this. Um, when we think about going into 2020, you're absolutely right, Meg, that like social media was a huge part of our lives at that point in time. The looming 2020 election was a huge part of the cultural mind of kind of like a goal that everyone had to remove someone from office and get back to normalcy. Um, and I think if we think back to 2020 and we think about where we're at today with AI, with data centers, there has been a pretty significant break in terms of where that idea lives in the cultural zeitgeist. I think then it still felt like the future, and social
Mm.
media was the technology that was taking over our lives. Um, I think now AI feels very much more of the present. And I think also something that happened over the last 4 years, you think about the Chips and Science Act, you think about Build Back Better, was this idea of reinvesting in America. And what does it mean to reinvest in America? It means that there's a whole lot of like rural places that just need technology and need data centers and need all this sort of stuff to power our society as we move to the next wherever we're going. But there's people that live there that have always lived there and that are going to be affected by this. And that's something that is like a constant in American history is like people settle someplace, that place may boom and then it busts. And then after the bust, maybe 30, 40 years go by, and then people with money pay attention and say, okay, we need to use this land for X reasons. And so to me, it was more of like this underlying fear of the future that whoever controls this is going to control the future of this community and is most likely going to come from outside of the community. Like Pedro Pascal's whole demeanor, the interior of his house, the clothes he wore was not a part of Eddington. Like that was very much of like a um, you know, neoliberal mayor finding his way into small town America. And so I'll pause there because like that was kind of my take was just like it's this underlying fear that at the end of the movie ends up becoming the next phase of
Yeah.
what's coming to this town. But what are your guys' thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Megan.
Yeah, I totally see what you're saying, RJ. It didn't bother me as much in the film. To me, it kind of served as like an allegory for the same stuff that's always been happening in America, in that we're taking someone else's land and we're convincing them that we need it for really good reason and we're going to exploit it. And there's, I think, definitely a reason why it's half on the indigenous reservation. Like that is, it's within the indigenous reservation town that is, there's so many hints to that in the movie, like when Joe crosses in that insane shootout scene, which I'm super excited to talk to you guys about, and he falls through the roof and he lands on the indigenous museum of the town and like destroys it. And there's just so much about taking land that doesn't belong to you, telling people it's for their good, exploiting it, using the natural resources. Like I think at one point, Pedro Pascal's having an online like council meeting, and this woman who's arguing against it, she's like, we're in a drought, and he says, we're always in a drought, like, and because they live in the desert. And to me that was just so funny because it was like they want to put this data center in which uses, like, I guess these AI organizations, which is something my daughter told me about, they use insane amounts of water, like absolutely insane amounts of water. And the fact that they want to put it in a desert, and I loved the visuals at the end of the film with just the data center lit up in this huge desert, and you just know that it's like draining water from all of these communities. And I think
Powering Los Angeles, powering Dallas,
right,
powering Houston,
powering all the like jerks in New York who are gonna like want to know on Chat GPT what is in an alfalfa sprout or some bullshit. I think there's just like a sadness to that, and I think we all know that water is going to be something that is, hard to find at some point. So to me, it was like a giant allegory, and I thought that it was kind of well done. But I do think that there are many things in this story that the plot point is weaker, and I think that is a little bit of one of them. So I do see that.
You talked, Meg, about the idea that this movie kind of flips around who you should be rooting for in a really fascinating way. And I think it's something I want to talk about. Unless RJ, do you have more that you want to say about the data center at this point in time?
No, I think just what Megan said about kind of the plot points, to me, like and maybe, I rated this as 4 stars. I think it was awesome. So I don't want it to like get that to overshadow it. But I think the things that felt a little bit too like overtly, like they were it was a little bit too leading in terms of like the COVID stuff and the data center stuff. Like I totally agree with everything you're saying, but it was a little bit like handing it to you on a platter as opposed to like letting you figure it out.
Absolutely.
So I think that was, to me, that was the only thing. But the ending was like really pretty amazing. I mean, the last, like, just the way that it all came together was really smart. And I don't know. I have other stuff I want to mention, but nothing about the data center. I'm good.
I agree with you, though. I think there's a lot of heavy-handedness in this plot, like a lot. It's
Yeah,
very tongue in cheek at times, and it almost is hard to, which I think is my issue with the tone that I gave up, that I kind of like ignored the second time I saw it. But the tone the first time, I was very confused. I was like, are we laughing at this? Are we sad about this? But I think that's because he's really good. And this is, I think, kind of like a theme to me with him, is that he makes the tragic ridiculous. And I think sometimes it's hard to know how to like take that when you're watching a movie like this. And I can see why this movie would be confusing to a large audience that's not going to like spend a lot of time really thinking about it, because um it does come across as a farce at times.
the poster to this movie is a line of buffaloes running off of a cliff.
Yes. I wanted to
And
talk about that. Like, why do you guys think that is?
well, it strikes me as that was one of that's symbolically the great resource that as Americans move west, we just completely did away with. And the battle over there's a great Ken Burns two-part documentary about the American buffalo on Amazon Prime, I want to say. Speaking of data centers, that really like dives into thematically like what did the buffalo symbolize from a natural environment standpoint, from a Native American standpoint, and from an American just endless appetite for land and resources and technology. And I think that like that image connects with where we're going with AI and where we're going to need to build these data centers to build up AI to compete with China and to get to the whatever the next step is. And this is just what it appears that we're doing as a larger country, because it appears that we're doing this. and so like
Yeah.
I wonder in a sense, like, do you think it would have been a stronger movie if that had been removed and the focus had just been on COVID? Or do you think it would have been a stronger movie if you removed the COVID angle and just focused on we're bringing an AI data center to a rural community?
I don't think the movie works without COVID. I think it's a movie
Yeah.
about that time. I think it absolutely has to have that. It's like, I think that was such a divisive point in our country, and I think that it's really important, and it's also such a time that there was such a clash between urban areas and rural areas, and I think that he's looking at that a lot as well. But I think that you kinda need the data center, because I think there needs to be an encroaching outside force in the film, and I think that could have been strengthened, and I think that's kind of maybe part of what you're alluding to, RJ, but I think that there has to be an external, someone coming from the outside for them.
Yeah, and I don't want to be overly critical, because I think it was really great. I mean, I do think I don't think that either of those things could have stood on their own, you know. And I think the
Yeah.
balance, like, overall worked really well, you know.
I wonder in some ways if like like the George Soros funded Antifa warriors that come in at the end, that kind of kick off or join in with like the murderous destruction, like that to me maybe was like a bit too absurdist, which Aster
Yeah.
tends to live in. I do think though, like r- you're kind of suspending reality with a lot of what happens in the last 30 minutes and just leaning into whatever COVID did, it sped up this level of insanity that we were already moving towards. Like, if you think about where all of us were 10 years ago, like politically speaking, things were not great. There were a lot of reasons for both sides to be angry at each other. And social media was only intensifying that. But like, starting about, I mean, 10 years ago tonight was the Republican primary debate where Trump insulted Megyn Kelly. And I only know this because I was driving through Cleveland and I watched it in a hotel room that night. And it was kind of the moment where it seemed like the Trump show that had happened over the previous month and a half was about to meet political reality, and it was going to just have been this fad of the summer. And he won all of this support, and he rose in the polls following that debate. And things have really changed as a result of that.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that like the absurdity, yes, very heavy-handed. Don't disagree with there at all. But all that that did was symbolically show like how much like the water is boiling around us, you know, and how much like we're experiencing this like one big thing upon another. Like one thing that would have been made national news for 2 weeks 25 years ago is now
Yeah.
like the afternoon headline.
I have a question about that, and I don't know if this is the right time to talk about it, but so that was supposed to be considered like Antifa, that group that's on the plane? Because I
Theoretically,
don't
yeah.
really understand what Antifa is. I've never like seen an interview with somebody in Antifa. I don't know what their perspective. I think it's like a lot of made up stuff. I thought it was like a militant, either Black Lives Matter group, because the posters are like Black Lives Matter on the plane. But we barely see that. We see like a person with their mask down from behind, and then we see some of the posters and like some riot gear in there in this plane. And then they play a huge part in the ending of the film. And I felt like a little bit like the plot, that was kind of one of those like almost like a Hail Mary, like save the plot kind of a thing. And maybe it had to be that way, and maybe that works. But I couldn't tell. Like to me, it just felt a little bit like it was thrown in a little bit. I don't know how that came across to you guys.
I mean, I think that's what like the absurdist beauty of it was that like this
Yeah.
is like basically what Republicans have said about Antifa was like it was as if it ever was real, which it never really was.
Well, that's what I
But
mean.
you
It
know,
wasn't real, right? Yeah.
right? No, 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 not in
Even the
that. I mean,
logo
not
was
even.
like clip art
Yeah,
laughable, like the hand with the
yeah.
Right.
globe. Like, come on.
Right.
I mean, it
Right.
was,
Right.
but that's why, like, I guess that's why maybe at the end of the day, we are supposed to be, it is an absurdist kind of take on everything,
Yeah.
Right. So that's kind of like cementing that perspective. That makes sense. And I appreciate that. I like the send up of everybody on every side. I think that there's a balance in that, Astor doesn't let anybody off the hook, which I think is pretty awesome.
Well, I want to talk about that, but I want to ask you guys really quickly, just from a movie making standpoint. I thought that the way that the film shot uh, New Mexico, and that the way that the score complemented the overall tension of the movie, um, was one of the like technical high points. And I think that like I don't think that this movie is going to be nominated for much. I think it's going to piss too many people off, and
Mm,
uh,
it's kind of sad.
there's going to be enough like moments of absurdism that people aren't going to like spend time talking about. They're just going to be like, it was fucking weird. That didn't make sense. Um, RJ, what were your thoughts on the way that the score complemented the overall movie and the cinematography at large?
I mean, with the score and the cinematography, I mean, I guess it was sort of a coincidence that I watched the Kubrick movie right after, because I think it was
Yeah.
very similar, in the way that they, the simple kind of spooky sounds of the score that kept the kind of plot and the pacing going was really pretty cool. But the cinematography, like of the entire, kind of desolate, you know, city. I mean, it just like the town was made to look exactly as you would hope to. I think it just did a great job. But to me, the cinematography as the sheriff gets like sicker and starts to like go into the desert, like the way that the cinematography shifts while he's having this asthma attack, and the sound of him at the very end, breathing raggedly along with the score, with the cinematography kind of like spinning around and him being disoriented. And he had a really bad day. Like he got beat up, he had COVID and he's getting beat up from all sides, falling down mountains. I mean, but like the way that the sound and the cinematography work together to like heighten that sense of, everything falling apart, but also him being like disoriented and kind of like out of his mind was, I thought, amazing.
Yeah, I felt very similar. I thought this was done by Bobby Krilic, who records as the Hacks and Cloak. He recorded an album in 2013 called Excavation, which is one of my favorite records of that year. He also did the soundtrack to Midsommar, which was one of my favorite records of that year. And I thought this was just as impactful. And the way that they shot New Mexico, you felt the ruralness, you felt the bigness, and you felt the isolation. Meg, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, the score, how it has a lot of humming and the rattlesnakes really kind of plays on those classic Western film scores in a way that I just thought was absolutely beautiful, really eerie and quiet and desolate feeling. And, I think what's cool about Aster is that like the way his set design is and everybody that he works with is that he had these really visually spacious scenes with that were outside all of his exteriors. Like New Mexico, sometimes it looks like a movie set, like actually looks fake. How it has these like buildings that have nothing around them for miles. And I thought he used that to great effect, and how he had, people were socially distanced from each other. And like when Joe Cross and the mayor are having that discussion, and the mayor's in the bar and Joe Cross is outside, and there's like the glass in between them, and he shoots it from the side. So you really see how, away from apart from each other they are. Just a lot of tricks like that were incredible. But his interiors are amazing. They're so crowded and so layered. There's so much stuff in people's homes. I think a scene that I know we should talk about, but the scene when Brian's telling his dad about making whiteness disappear, and they're having this conversation, that's one of the funniest scenes. And there's just racks of guns behind them, and I think that he does his interiors, like the way that Joe Cross's home is so dark and
Cluttered and yeah, dark
cluttered. There's
and
just
yeah.
so much stuff in there. And he's just really good at kind of visual gags. He kind of packs his frame with a lot of visual gags and a lot of stuff for you to like look into. And I think it's amazing. And I think we'll talk about it, but the shootout scene is some of the best cinematography. I absolutely thought it was just incredible.
Yeah, the scene where Brian is telling his dad about the evilness of whiteness, and the guns are behind him, that kind of like digs into the absurd, like that whole scene is like the absurdist humor nature of Aster, where um Brian has essentially learned something that a lot of white people seem to learn and absorb in May and early June of 2020. And then we're telling their parents about this. And rather than understanding, his father says, "Are you fucking R word?" Um, and it's just like a way to cut down his son. And also, I think as a viewer, you're viewing that in black and white. You are either accepting the humor of that moment and accepting the fact that uh, um, in that moment in time there is there's a lot of black and white being spoken, and that black and white is not actually helping this situation. But also then you recognize where this kid came from, that his dad's got giant gun racks behind him, and like that just like it's piles of irony upon irony.
I just want to say quickly, because I just want to say quickly, Brian, if you'll allow me, is there anything that Joaquin Phoenix can't do? I mean, it's just
No.
like it to me. One of the greatest things about this movie was just what he does. I mean, he's so perfect at. He's so good. Like, and I mean, we won't go through filmography right now, but just like he's so incredible, and I think like everything he does is just great. I love him.
He goes so hard. Like, he
Yeah.
commits harder than maybe any actor ever. Like, he's so in it, and he is just, like I just believe everything he says, and he's able to find, like, certain actors, their faces only do certain things, and Joaquin's face can do anything and everything, and he finds new ways to look sad and anxious more than, like, any other character actor ever.
So
Like,
believable.
he's
So
so
believable.
authentic. He's
Everything
so
about this
authentic.
role was so believable, and which is I think really hard, especially with something
He
like this.
kind of plays the pathetic, power hungry white male better than anyone I've ever seen. And he just plays that over and over again and somehow infuses it with new ideas and with new like you said, new looks, new tones. Like the scene, there's a scene where he gets in bed. It's early in the movie, and says goodnight to his wife, and then he rolls over on his side and he gets his phone and he's like holding his phone. And it's
Yeah.
like a shot I feel like I've never seen in a movie because it is so modern, but it just says so much about like this, you know, device that you have in your hands that is, you know, a small percentage of your overall the overall size of your body, but it like controls everything. Your whole body kind of like shapes to it when you're on it, and like you're reading something really intense, or you're like in like an intense text conversation with someone. But like I remember there were these images like from 8 or 9 years ago of like couples in bed reading their phone, but you removed the phone, and like
Mm,
that overall image, like, you know, you're right there next to someone, but like you're both in your own world. Like he captures that in the film here that adds so much to it. It's kind of the last thing I want to talk about with regards to the movie is the fact that, and you really get this with Joaquin's role, and I want to get your thoughts on this because you were introduced to him as the first the first scene with him, he is being um uh, insulted by, I think it's county sheriffs about him crossing county lines or crossing precinct lines. But you get the sense as the movie begins that he is kind of the social media version of what a left leaning person in 2020 would have hated. He's pretty
mhm,
ignorant, not very grammatically correct, doesn't understand why he needs to wear masks for seemingly basic reasons, um, fights against it, decides to run for mayor, and within all of that, starts to win you over as the viewer and makes you question your own biases going in. It makes you wonder if you were actually in the wrong the entire time. And then as the movie goes along, it begins to pull out these parts of your own personality, your own character from that period in time, and makes those aspects of yourself into a practical joke told over and over and over again. And so as you're going through the movie, you're kind of wondering, was I wrong? Was I actually, did I have the wrong, you know, lacking empathy perspective during this period in time? This must have been really hard for someone like Joe Cross and people like him. But then the movie ends with him going on a murderous rampage and still being elected mayor, and the social media naive main character Brian ends up turning into like a MAGA TikTok superstar. You know, he's with a beautiful woman in Florida. His life is just like all likes and retweets. Um, and Joaquin Phoenix has paved the way for an even more evil, conspiratorially minded person to take over essentially as mayor, who is going to bring the data center, profit off of it, and basically be the face of Eddington going forward. So I'm curious your thoughts on like the choices that were made there to really make you flip over and over again based off of your own biases that you brought with yourself to this movie, but then like how this movie challenged that.
yeah, it's a big question. I think that if someone wrote a book, a nonfiction book about Joe Cross, I probably wouldn't feel for him the way that the movie made me feel for him. And I think that's why it's a genius art form in so many ways, because film can and put us in someone's shoes in a way that very other few forms of art can. I think that, like, it's a very bold choice because this story could have been easier to take, I think, if, and I don't mean that as a compliment, if it had ended with Joe not murdering everybody. And I think that it would have, if you realize that, like, oh, I really do feel bad for that guy, like, it did bring up for me as someone who lives in New York City and who is surrounded by extremely woke culture. And I mean that in the best and the worst ways. And it was refreshing to see send ups of that and see self-righteousness and how it hurts the causes that we care about and really makes people feel even more divisive. But I did think that watching the movie back the second time, the slap scene, I realized how important that scene is for the movie. And I didn't really the first time. Like it's a big deal, but I think I thought it was like important, but then when I watched it again and I realized how demoralizing and how condescending it is, the way that he's treated in that moment. And that to me was a huge turning point in the movie. And it made me realize why Joe Cross does this is because he's just absolutely fed up with being condescended to and being treated like that. And I think that it's important that we see this character who's supposed to be more liberal, more educated, um, more in tune to, the larger world. We see him acting the most cruel, I think, and the most immature.
Besides killing people.
Yeah, which then leads to that. Um, but to me, it really changed how I felt about the film, kind of thinking about the importance of that scene and why that scene was there. It's interesting because I think the the movie is so different if you think about it without that ending, because also the ending is so cinematic and has that old time Western feel and has that thrilling ending, which is definitely probably the most interesting kind of shots I've seen in a movie all year is when the camera is dancing around Joaquin and he is in there with the gun and he's breathing hard. Like RJ was talking about, his asthma inhalers run out and he can't breathe and he's being tracked in like a dance with the camera. And it feels like you're in a first person shooter video game and also like you're in a political thriller or a Western kind of like duel. And I think it's just an absolute feat of cinematography and it's beautifully done. But I don't know how else the movie would have, like, I kept trying to think of how else would the movie have ended if Joe didn't do that. Like, I don't know where the movie goes then.
Yeah, I mean, I think I wonder if like because there was a part of me when that started to unfold that I was like, okay, this is it almost reminded me of the ending of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where for about three quarters of the runtime, you're like, wow, this is a very different Quentin Tarantino movie.
Mhm.
And then for the last 30 minutes, you're like, this is a Quentin Tarantino movie.
Yeah.
He just saved the Tarantino violence for the end. Um, I think that a lot of that fits because of his kind of testament to the Western,
Yeah.
and that is how a Western ends, is with, you know, good versus evil shootouts, the right versus the wrong, and whoever comes out is clearly the right person. And I think that this movie does such a great job of honoring American Western filmmaking while also throwing it into a blender and spinning it up, which is what a lot of the last 10 years have done to us from a who is right, who is wrong. I think if you looked from a broader perspective of what sides people are on in 2025, it would be very different from what you had anticipated in 2000.
Yeah.
Um, for a lot of different reasons. And a lot of that has been like things are getting more intense in a way that we were all kind of aware it could again, and it probably would, but not in the ways that we wanted or were expecting.
Yeah.
Um, it feels like from a societal standpoint and from like a movie making standpoint, so much of late 90s, early 2000s filmmaking was about this sense that like nothing really happens and why can't we live in a time when stuff happens and big ideas are thrown
Yeah.
around. And now we do live in that, and there's almost a sense of like, well, no, 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 but not like this. Like, I want the righteousness of, defeating the Nazis. Well, what if like the characteristics of that drew someone to National Socialism also drew them towards simple mundane needs that you potentially agree with, and then that person then goes on a murderous rampage. And so, well, was that the Nazi in them, or was that the society? Was
Mm,
that time? Like, it just spins up all these like big ideas and accusations that we have. And I think the thing that I keep going back to about why I love this movie so much is that it seems to me to tell the most honest tale of how good and evil have been blurred, and
yeah.
black and white have been blurred. And we are in very much new times right now because of technology, plus things like a global pandemic, plus reawakening of race relations and what those mean, and what the legacy of race relations over the last, or the entirety of our history have meant to where we are today. Um, and then, what does it mean to be a descendant of, you know, white pioneers, I guess is the best way to put it, who came from Europe, came to America, and then continued moving west and have settled there for generations. What does that mean? And where do those people fit into the story? And so, like, there's just a lot of unknowns about where we're going and where we are even right now. And I feel like this movie makes you feel pretty bad about all pathways in
Yeah,
a way that I don't totally think I've seen.
absolutely. And that there's no sense of a shared truth anymore. I felt like
Yes.
everyone in the film is so siloed in their beliefs, and I don't know if we're ready to really think about that as a society yet, but that to me is like the defining thing that is changing our world, is that none of us agree on what's really happening. And I think that was so well done in this film, and done with humor. I think that's what's really blown me away about the movie, is that like this you've got this epic shootout that's supposed to be honoring westerns and thrilling and uses cinematography beautifully, but it's also hilarious because none of the people can shoot. Like they're literally shooting at each other for like 10 minutes and nobody's hitting each other. It's hilarious in a dark way.
Yeah, I mean, that aspect of, like, we have these extremely powerful weapons that we don't totally know how to use kind of
Yeah.
brings up this additional idea that I think could be focused on an entire movie in and of itself. The sense that, like, um, we have the tools, but we haven't had to use them the way that we had to use them in past eras, and so we're relearning how to, and that danger of relearning how to means that a lot of big mistakes and a lot of crazy stuff can end up happening.
And everybody has access to them.
Right, right,
Where they
right.
didn't used to, like, anybody. Like, that scene when he goes into the store during the shootout is amazing and comes out with this, like, war weapon, this humongous gun that's literally a weapon of, like, mass destruction.
Well, and that added to, like, my acceptance of some of the more absurd elements of the story, because I was just like, if you're
Right.
gonna do that, you're essentially towing the line into Schwarzenegger action movies. You're towing the line
Oh, yeah.
into, first person shooter games where, like, you just end up with a gigantic weapon that, like, you didn't earn, you didn't, like, have to seek out. You just have it, and now you use it, and, like, do you know how to use it? Because the destruction level on this is intense.
I love
Um
that, how, like, I'll just say, like, how, usually in those kind of movies, think about, like, a Schwarzenegger film when he's walking around with a giant gun in, like, Terminator, he's, like, big and beautiful and strong, and then in this one, it's, like, Joe Cross who's, like, shivering and, like, can't breathe, and he's, like, shaking, he can barely hold the thing up. It's hilarious. It's really pretty genius. I think this movie is so layered, it's gonna take people a long time and a lot of viewings to really get.
I mean, I think to that point, like, we've been presented for the better part of 80 years with really beautiful World War II films that really
Mhm.
showcase the sacrifice people made, really showcase the desire people had to do something right, right in quotes, if you will, and then the ultimate victory, especially from the westernized side of this. And I think the reality is, you know, any history you've read of that era, there was a lot more pushback against the US entering the war and continuing in the war. And there were things like, you couldn't buy up rubber because that needed to go over to the war, and how that impacted people from a tire, car tires. And so people weren't getting new cars. And so it was affecting the economy that way. And, there were ways that we had to sacrifice here in the States for success overseas that kind of just gets glossed over as well. We won, so all the success, all the sacrifices were worth it. But in that moment in time, there was a lot of political pushback. There was a lot of anger. There was a lot of animosity. There was a lot of anti-patriotism towards the war effort that we just don't pay attention to as much today. And I think one of the things that makes this so fascinating is you see, to your point, Joe Cross is our hero. Is he? I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
that's not who I signed up for, but like, he is the person in the end who wins.
Yeah.
Um,
Although at a great cost,
at a great
right?
cost.
Like
He
he's
he
barely
essentially
alive anymore,
right.
which I don't
Which
even know if it's like he doesn't look happy. It's not a nice place to be.
no, there's
So
that great scene
it
at the end where he's
yeah.
he's his caregiver's taking him to the bathroom and
Oh, so
he starts to kind of flail and the caregiver hits him and they linger and the caregiver kind of pauses for a second and says, I'm sorry. And like that moment, I felt just like a lot of like, okay, you really get what you're like, how muddy the waters are here. I thought that
yeah.
was fascinating.
And then the last scene when the caregiver they put Joe in the bed and then the mother-in-law gets in the bed and then the caregiver gets in the bed with them. And I just thought he has to make a joke even in the last second. It's so good.
Yeah, that all of this is almost like
Yeah.
ancestral. Um,
Uh,
All right, so Eddington is currently playing in theaters. I would encourage everyone to go and check this out. This currently has a 3.4 rating on average rating on Letterbox. It is pretty divisive. There are like 10,000 people who have it as a 2 star. There are 30,000
wow.
people who have it as a 3.5 star. There are 9,000 people who have it as a 5 star. I have it as a 4.5 star, which is still in the minority. Only 11% of us. Seems like most people are rating the 4 star range, but where did you have this movie rated and why?
I had it as a 4 star. I don't think it's a perfect movie. I think it needs more of an emotional center or a stronger decision on tone for me to give it 5 stars. But I would potentially consider bumping it up depending on how I feel about it after a while. But I think I feel good about 4 stars right now.
I have it as 4.5 because I think that the risks ultimately pay out
Hmm.
and are worth it, even though there are some deep flaws. I think that a lot of it's going to depend for me on my rewatch. I'm either going to go see this in the theaters in the next week or I'm going to wait for it to be on streaming. I haven't figured that out yet, but this will definitely be a like 2 to 3 watch in the calendar year movie for me. There's a lot to chew off from. Even I think even if you walk away from this movie angry and pissed off and like hating it, it's definitely worth watching again because there's so much to chew on.
Yeah. And it makes me want to bump it up just because I just always want risk taking in art. And I think he takes huge risks here. And I think you're going to feel even stronger about it after you see it again.
I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
Risks abound. All right. Are there any movies you would recommend people check out based off of this? And we've talked about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and some Tarantino. Is there anything else you'd want to throw in there?
There are two movies that I thought kind of reminded me of. One is The Parallax View, a movie that you
Mm,
told me to see from 1974. It's a political thriller, also a conspiracy movie, one man against the system, and a big end of film shootout that uses setting and space in a really interesting way. I really loved that movie. And I also want to put a plug in for a super weird movie. Are you ready for this one, Brian?
please.
It is Bo Burnham's Inside. Have you ever seen
Mm,
this?
I saw that during the pandemic. Yes.
Did you watch it then? Yeah, it's,
Yeah.
it's a musical comedy special that Burnham wrote and filmed during lockdown, and he put it out in June of 21. It's fascinating. It addresses a lot of these topics that Aster's getting to, who we become when we're trapped at home and isolated. I think isolation is such a strong theme in this movie that we didn't get to talk too much about, but I think that Inside really digs in deep, and I think it's a very artistic, risk-taking movie that I was really moved by when I saw.
That's a really good call. I think, if you liked if you're moved by this, I would say 2 movies from 2007, There Will Be Blood and No Country for Old Men would be,
Mhm.
complimentary watches just as, what is rural America over the last 150 years? What does it mean? Where does it mean in our culture from a technology standpoint, but also from a cultural standpoint? I would also recommend a movie I watched in the fall called Hardcore, which follows a conservative father in the
So good.
1970s who flies out to LA trying to find his daughter, who he believes has been kidnapped and is being forced to appear in pornography films. And it really kind of gives you that, who am I rooting for here? Why am I rooting for them? Is this the right person to root for? What is right and wrong from a cultural standpoint? I thought it was a really fascinating look. And then um, I would say also a movie that I know we both watched this year, the first Coen Brothers movie, Blood Simple,
Oh,
which
so
really
good.
focuses again on small town America. What does it mean at these cultural touch points where technology is starting to take over and right and wrong are questioned, and you know, uh, violence, murder all ensue, and how does that impact people? So, and then, I think that a great complement to this movie is Oppenheimer, which is set in the
Hmm.
desert as well, and is set at a time in 1945 when we kind of reset the trajectory of the world and kind of led to where we're at today in a lot of ways. And this idea that all these smart urban people are coming from afar into rural New Mexico to utilize this technology and the space that they have here to change the world ultimately kind of fits into that, like the AI data center that's at the heart of our lingering on the corners of Eddington.
Good
So
comp. I like those. We should talk about Blood Simple or Hardcore on this show sometime.
I am here for it. Both those
Yeah,
movies kind of blew my mind this year.
me too.
Um, but that will be for the future. We will have more blockbuster card episodes to come. We have a couple more here in the very near future. We're going to be doing one at the end of the month, a Chinese film I cannot recommend enough called Mountains May Depart, which is currently on Criterion. So more and more coming for you guys here, plus a return to Library Card. We'll be talking about actual books next week. What do we have next week?
Yeah, we're talking about Crossroads by Jonathan Franzen. Finally, going to talk about an author that we've referenced possibly in almost every library card episode because we both all really love him. So I'm excited to talk about that book, which is I just reread again, and I just can't say enough good things about it.
Yet another book that people come to the desert, they make drastic decisions, and it impacts their lives.
It's true. It's actually true.
The
Mhm.
desert, the desert, man.
I love the
Well, thank
desert.
you all for hanging out with us here for this episode of Blockbuster Card. We will see you guys next week with a focus on Jonathan Franzen's Crossroads. Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.